Welcome to the deep dive. If you're joining us today, you are stepping right into what I can only really describe as a masterclass.
Absolutely.
You are the student here, and we are stepping into the roles of your co-instructors for this session. We're going to walk you through an absolutely massive evolution in the tech world.
A total paradigm shift.
Right. We are looking at the rulebook that governs how the world's most critical systems are checked, balanced, and well trusted. And let me tell you, this isn't just a minor update.
No, not just a few typos corrected.
Exactly. We are talking about a seismic shift in how we verify reality in a digital age.
We really are. We're exploring the leap from ISACA's IT audit framework, which practitioners usually just call ITAF. Specifically, we are looking at the 4th edition, which was published back in 2020.
Okay.
And we're going to compare it directly to the brand new 5th edition, published in 2026.
So a 6-year gap, but a world of difference.
Oh, a completely different universe.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to understand the context of the world when these two documents were written.
Right. Think back to 2020.
Yeah, the 4th edition was built for a world that was primarily focused on traditional IT management. The focus was heavily on checking the boxes for system availability, ensuring traditional data integrity.
Making sure the servers were running.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And creating very tight, rigid linkages to established frameworks like COBIT 2019. It was a rulebook for a world where IT was still largely viewed as just a supporting function to the business.
Right. A world where the IT auditor was basically the person who made sure your password had at least one capital letter and a special character.
Yeah.
And that the backup tapes were being sent to an off-site vault.
Right. That was the job. But the 5th edition feels completely different. It feels like it was built for a world that is completely obsessed with what ISAC is calling digital trust.
Digital trust. That's the buzzword now.
It is the core concept. We are talking about artificial intelligence, agile workflows, quantum computing, and incredibly complex cybersecurity threats. It's a completely different landscape.
It really is. And the numbers alone are wild. They tell this incredible story about how the field has just exploded.
They do. During the era of the 4th edition, the ISACA community, which is the premier global association for IT governance and audit, had around 145,000 members.
Across 188 countries, which is huge.
It is substantial.
Mm-hmm.
But look at where we are today as we unpack this 5th edition. That membership number has surged to over 180,000.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a massive influx of professionals dedicating their careers to information security, governance, risk, and this whole overarching concept of digital trust.
It really reflects how this field has moved from the back office straight to the boardroom. Literally every enterprise on the planet now relies on these professionals to ensure they aren't the next headline in a major data breach.
Or an AI scandal.
Exactly. It's wild to think about how much the job has changed. So for you, the listener, whether you're an industry veteran prepping for a major audit or someone studying for your CISA certification.
Or just someone insanely curious about how companies prevent their own algorithms from going rogue.
Yes. We are going to break this down logically. Because this is a true deep dive, we're going to structure this conversation exactly as a student would read through a course syllabus.
Chronologically.
Right. We are going chronologically through the framework, unpacking this evolution one standard at a time. We'll look at the general standards, which lay out the fundamental principles of who an auditor is.
Then the performance standards.
Yep, the boots on the ground work. And finally, the reporting standards, which dictate how the brutal truths are communicated to the people in charge.
I think that chronological approach is the best way to digest a framework this dense. It allows us to see how the foundation supports the actual fieldwork.
Let's start with the structure then.
Right. So what's fascinating here is that when you look at the actual structure of the rulebook, the fundamental DNA, both editions, actually share the same architectural skeleton.
Okay.
You have your general standards, which are categorized as the 1000 series. You have your performance standards, the 1200 series, and your reporting standards, the 1400 series.
So the numbering didn't change.
That numbering system hasn't changed at all. But the purpose behind those numbers has shifted dramatically.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though.
Go for it.
If the numbering system is the same and the broad categories are the same, a skeptic might look at this and say, well, they just slapped a new cover on it and called it a day.
I can see why someone might think that.
So you're saying the underlying philosophy is what really changed. How does the 5th edition actually change the game in how these structural components interact?
To understand that, you have to look at the stated disclaimer and purpose of the documents. If you look at the introductory text of the 4th edition, Its stated purpose was primarily to serve as an educational resource for assurance practitioners.
So a textbook.
Yes, very focused on traditional IT controls, a reference manual. The fifth edition, however, introduces this concept of digital trust as its core pursuit right out of the gate.
Okay.
But mechanically, the biggest structural change is how it elevates something called tools and techniques.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because in the fourth edition, tools and techniques felt a bit like an appendix.
Very much so.
It was almost like, here are the rigid rules you must follow, and oh, by the way, if you flip to the back of the book, here are some extra worksheets you might find helpful.
That is exactly how it was perceived. The standards were the law, the guidelines were the commentary on the law, and the tools were just optional accessories.
Right.
The fifth edition completely overhauls this dynamic. It formally elevates tools and techniques to be a core, interrelated component right alongside the standards and guidelines.
Let's define those for the listener, just to be totally clear.
Sure. Standards establish the absolute mandatory requirements, the musts. If you violate a standard, you are not performing a valid audit.
Got it.
Guidelines offer the recommended practices, the how-tos. They help you interpret the standards. But now, tools and techniques are explicitly positioned as practical aids that are absolutely essential to applying the standards in real-world contexts.
What kind of tools are we talking about?
Things like Performance Guideline 2208 for audit sampling, or specific ISACA white papers, dynamic audit programs, and risk assessment templates.
So if I'm understanding this right, if you think of the fourth edition as a traditional static textbook that sits on a shelf,
Right.
the fifth edition acts much more like a living, breathing digital toolkit.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
It acknowledges that technology like cloud architecture or machine learning is moving entirely too fast for a static set of rules printed on paper to keep up. You need adaptable tools.
A static standard might just say, you must assess the risk of new technology. A living toolkit provides you with a dynamic, constantly updated matrix for assessing the specific risks of large language models.
Which didn't even exist in the enterprise consciousness a few years ago.
Exactly. And that shift from static theory to dynamic application brings us perfectly into the very first actual standard in the book, General Standard 1001.
The audit charter. This is essentially the auditor's license to operate within a company, right? Without this, you are just a person wandering around the IT department asking annoying questions.
Precisely. Historically, the baseline has always been that the IT audit function must have a formally defined and approved charter. That bar hasn't changed.
It's at the foundation.
Both editions mandate that this document must exist, it must be approved by the highest levels of management or the board, and it must clearly outline the audit function's purpose, its authority, and its accountability.
It gives them the right to demand access.
Yes, the right to exist, the right to demand access to highly sensitive systems, and the right to report findings without fear of retaliation.
It's their shield and their badge. But when I was reading through the source material, what really stood out to me was the massive leap the fifth edition makes in what that license actually covers.
The scope of work.
Right, because the charter has to explicitly list the types of work performed. If it's not in the charter, you technically don't have the mandate to audit it.
That is the critical nuance. When you look at the types of work performed under the guidelines for the audit charter in the fourth edition, it listed your standard, historical, fair.
Like financial audits.
Financial audits, operational audits, compliance audits, and integrated audits.
Yeah.
And for a long time, that was enough.
But the fifth edition changes that.
The fifth edition explicitly adds two massive new categories to the types of work performed: AI ethics and third-party service audits.
Hold on, let's pause and really think about the implications of that for the person actually doing the job.
It's huge.
Adding AI ethics to the audit charter means the very definition of an IT auditor has expanded in a profound, almost philosophical way.
It has.
You aren't just checking if a server is properly cooled anymore. You aren't just checking if a user access review was signed off by a manager on time.
No.
Management is now giving you the mandate and the burden of checking if a mathematical algorithm is acting ethically. That is mind-blowing to me. How does someone even begin to approach that?
It is a profound shift in responsibility, and it requires a completely different mindset. If you are checking an access log, it is binary. Either the person had the right permissions or they didn't.
Right, ones and zeros.
But evaluating AI ethics, you are looking for algorithmic bias. You are assessing the transparency of incredibly complex decision-making models. You are evaluating the fairness of synthetic outputs.
Give me a real-world example of that.
Sure. Let's say your company uses an AI model to screen resumes for job applicants. The IT auditor now has the mandate to investigate whether that model is inadvertently screening out candidates based on demographic factors that correlate with race or gender.
Wow.
The charter empowers them to demand the training data and evaluate the ethical guardrails of that system.
And the other addition you mentioned was third-party service audits. I imagine this is because the whole concept of a company network doesn't really exist anymore.
Exactly. Not in the way it did 10 years ago.
Wow.
The inclusion of third-party service audits recognizes that in 2026, the traditional enterprise boundary has completely dissolved. Your company's most sensitive data isn't sitting in a server room down the hall.
It's in the cloud.
It's living in sprawling cloud environments like AWS or Azure, and intertwined with dozens of vendor ecosystems and SaaS platforms.
And auditors used to struggle to get access to that.
Constantly. In the past, auditors sometimes struggled to get permission to audit these external relationships because it was deemed outside the scope of internal IT.
Not our servers, not our problem.
Exactly. But the 5th edition charter explicitly gives them the mandate and the non-negotiable responsibility to audit that extended digital supply chain. You have to audit the vendor just as rigorously as you audit your own employees.
Which perfectly sets up the next logical question.
Okay.
If you are going to be auditing the ethics of an incredibly complex AI system built by your own company's rockstar engineering team, or if you are going to be auditing a massive cloud provider, you better have some serious independence.
You definitely need it.
Otherwise, management is just going to tell you to back off. So how does the framework handle that?
That brings us to General Standard 1002, which covers organizational independence. The fundamental truth across both rulebooks is that the audit function must remain completely free from undue influence.
Because you can't bite the hand that feeds you.
You cannot effectively audit someone who controls your paycheck and your career trajectory. So, the standard dictates that the chief audit executive must maintain a functional reporting line directly to the board of directors or the audit committee.
The board defines their scope.
Right, and reviews their findings. However, they also maintain an administrative reporting line to executive management, usually the CEO for day-to-day operations like human resources and basic budgeting.
Right, independence on the organizational chart. But in the real world, especially in the modern agile world, things aren't always that clean.
Very true.
IT auditors are often highly skilled technical people, and management loves to use highly skilled technical people to solve problems, not just point them out.
They get pulled into projects all the time.
Right. Auditors frequently get asked to act as consultants, helping to design the security controls for the very systems they might later be scheduled to audit. Does the new framework address that trap?
It absolutely does, and the 5th edition gets significantly stricter here. This is a major area of tension. The 5th edition introduces highly detailed guidelines around restrictions on non-audit roles and management responsibilities.
Okay.
It states unequivocally that auditors cannot perform non-audit roles in IT initiatives that require assuming management responsibilities.
Give me a concrete example of crossing that line. What constitutes a management responsibility?
Let's say the enterprise is rolling out a massive new ERP system. Management knows the IT audit team is brilliant at identifying control gaps. So the CIO asks the lead IT auditor to sit on the steering committee.
Sounds reasonable so far.
Sure. And they ask the auditor to actively design the segregation of duties matrix for the new system. Now, if the auditor just offers general advice on best practices, that might be acceptable. But if the auditor actually writes the matrix, approves the design, or makes binding decisions about how the system is built, they are acting as management.
They cross the line.
The moment you act as management, you completely lose your organizational independence regarding that system. You cannot objectively audit a control you designed yourself.
Because human nature dictates you aren't going to write a report saying your own design was a failure.
Exactly.
So how does the 5th edition solve for the reality that people change jobs? What if I was the database administrator last year, and this year I transferred into the internal audit department?
A very common scenario.
I built the databases, and now my new boss wants me to audit them.
That is where the 5th edition introduces the formalized concept of the cooling-off period. It explicitly defines the need for a mandatory period of time to pass before an auditor can participate in an engagement involving an area they previously managed.
Is it like a set number of days? 6 months?
Yeah.
A year?
The standard doesn't hard code a universal number of days because it depends on the complexity of the technology and the level of influence the person had.
Okay.
The IT audit function, often in collaboration with the audit committee, has to formally define what an appropriate period is. Generally, a year or two is common practice.
Makes sense.
The principle is clear. You cannot grade your own homework, and you cannot grade the homework you helped write until a significant amount of time has passed, the technology has evolved, and your emotional attachment to the project has dissipated.
I love how clear and unforgiving that rule is. It protects the integrity of the whole profession. But organizational independence is really about where you sit on the org chart.
Structurally, yes.
What about what is happening inside the auditor's head? Because you can report directly to the board of directors, but still be completely compromised mentally.
That is a brilliant distinction, and it leads us seamlessly into General Standard 1003, which covers auditor objectivity. Independence is structural. Objectivity is psychological. Both editions agree on the foundational principle. Auditors must maintain an impartial, unbiased, and independent mindset. You have to look at the facts, and only the facts.
But the fourth edition was honestly pretty brief about this, wasn't it? It basically felt like it was just telling people, hey, be objective, and if you think you aren't being objective, you should probably tell someone.
It was very high level.
Okay.
But the fifth edition delivers a massive, highly detailed update here. It introduces an entirely new conceptual framework for auditor objectivity.
A framework for human psychology.
Basically, this isn't just a suggestion anymore. It is a mandatory, rigorous three-step process that every auditor must continuously apply. Identify, evaluate, and manage threats to your objectivity.
This is where the psychology gets fascinating. The fifth edition actually categorizes the specific psychological and environmental threats an auditor might face. It names the demons, so to speak.
It does.
Let's walk through these categories because anyone listening who works in a corporate environment is going to recognize these instantly.
They are incredibly relatable. The framework identifies 7 specific categories of threat. First, you have self-interest.
Okay.
This is the classic financial or personal interest that might inappropriately influence your professional judgment.
Right. So, for example, if I am an IT auditor and my annual bonus is tied to the successful on-time launch of a new mobile app, there is a massive self-interest threat.
A huge one.
Subconsciously or even consciously, I might be tempted to ignore a glaring security vulnerability in that app because flagging it would delay the launch and cost me my bonus.
Exactly. The framework says you cannot objectively audit a system if your wallet is tied to its success.
What's the second one?
The second category is familiarity. This occurs when long, close relationships cause an auditor to have excessive sympathy toward the auditee's interests.
You just trust them too much.
Right. Or you become too accepting of their work without actually verifying it.
The classic golf buddy scenario.
Yes.
If I have been auditing the same director of infrastructure for 6 years and our kids play on the same soccer team and we get beers after work, my objectivity is severely threatened.
Absolutely.
When he tells me, don't worry, we fixed that firewall rule, I promise, the familiarity threat makes me want to just take his word for it instead of demanding the technical evidence.
Precisely. You stop being a skeptic and start being a friend. The third threat category is a critical addition for the era we live in: bias.
Oh, this is a big one.
The fifth edition explicitly calls out political, ideological, social, or psychological convictions that may compromise objectivity.
This is a really big deal, and I want to make sure we handle this carefully for the listener, because the world is incredibly polarized right now, and technology, especially things like content moderation algorithms or AI models, often intersects with very heated social and political debates.
It is essential to understand how the standard addresses this. The framework does not take a side on any political or ideological issue.
Right, it's neutral.
It doesn't endorse left-wing viewpoints, and it doesn't endorse right-wing viewpoints. What it does is impartially recognize a fundamental truth about human nature. Human beings hold strong beliefs.
We all do.
However, if an auditor allows their personal ideological worldview to influence their professional assessment of a system, they are directly violating IT audit standards.
Give me an example of how that might play out in an actual audit.
Suppose an auditor is evaluating an AI algorithm designed to moderate user comments on a platform.
A very common scenario today.
The auditor might have strong personal political convictions about what constitutes free speech versus harmful content, but their job is not to judge the algorithm based on whether it aligns with their personal politics.
So what are they judging it on?
Their job is to evaluate if the algorithm is operating exactly as management designed it, if it complies with relevant laws, and if its decision-making is transparent and consistent.
So they just look at the mechanics of it.
The standard mandates total neutrality. The auditor must impartially report on the factual evidence, regardless of whether that evidence aligns with or offends their personal, social, or political convictions. Do you leave your politics at the door?
That is such an important clarification. We are not endorsing any specific viewpoint on the show either, but simply conveying that the original source material demands absolute, unflinching neutrality from the auditor. It is about facts, not feelings.
Exactly.
What are the other threat categories?
The fourth is self-review, which we touched on with the cooling-off period. It's the threat of relying on the results of your own prior judgments.
Grading your own homework.
Yes. The fifth is management participation, the threat created by taking on management roles for the auditee.
Which we also covered.
The sixth is advocacy.
Advocacy, like becoming a cheerleader for the department.
Basically, yes. It happens when an auditor promotes the auditee's position or opinion to the point where their objectivity is compromised.
How does that happen?
If you find yourself passionately arguing with external regulators on behalf of your IT department, you are no longer an independent auditor. You are an advocate. You've crossed the line.
Got it. And the last one.
The seventh and final threat is intimidation. This is actual or perceived pressure, including attempts to exercise undue influence, that discourages the auditor from acting with integrity.
That is the angry chief information officer pulling the auditor into a closed-door meeting and saying, if you publish this finding, the board will cut my budget and I'll make sure they cut yours next.
It's bullying. Plain and simple.
So the framework gives us these 7 threats. Once you identify them, how do you manage them? Because the 5th edition doesn't just leave you hanging with a list of psychological problems. It dictates specific solutions, right?
It does. It breaks the safeguards down into 2 distinct levels. First, there are organizational safeguards.
Broad policies.
Right, implemented at the enterprise level. For example, to combat the familiarity threat, an organization might institute a mandatory rotation of audit assignments. You're simply not allowed to audit the same department for more than 3 consecutive years.
That makes total sense. Keep fresh eyes on everything.
Another organizational safeguard is having incredibly strict hiring and screening practices to catch financial conflicts of interest before someone is even hired.
What is the second level?
Resource safeguards. These are tactical staffing level measures applied to a specific audit engagement.
Give me an example.
If a specific auditor have a conflict, say, their spouse just took a job in the department they were supposed to audit, the safeguard is to remove that conflicted staff member from the engagement entirely.
Just take them off the project.
Or, if the conflict is minor, you might implement an independent peer review, where a second auditor meticulously checks the conflicted auditor's work papers.
And what if those safeguards aren't enough? What if the chief information officer is literally the auditor's brother-in-law, and there's no one else on staff with the technical skills to do the audit?
The standard is ruthless here. If you cannot apply safeguards to reduce the threat to an acceptable level, you must either eliminate the circumstance creating the threat, which usually is impossible, or you must decline the audit engagement entirely.
Wow, decline the engagement entirely.
You have to formally step away and say, we cannot perform this audit objectively.
That shows how seriously the profession is taking digital trust. You simply cannot compromise on objectivity. If the foundation is rotten, the whole audit is worthless.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's transition to Section 5 of our syllabus, which covers 2 closely related standards together. General Standard 1004, Reasonable Expectation, and General Standard 1005, Due Professional Care.
These 2 go hand in hand perfectly. The core principle for 1004 is that auditors must have a reasonable expectation that they can actually complete the audit properly before they even start the field work.
So don't set yourself up for failure.
Right. You cannot agree to audit a massive cloud migration if management refuses to give you administrative access to the cloud environment, or if the scope is so vaguely defined that you don't even know what systems are involved.
And 1005.
For 1005, due professional care, it means acting with the integrity, diligence, and professional skepticism expected of a competent practitioner.
Essentially, don't be negligent and don't take on impossible tasks. But the 5th edition leap here is huge because it introduces entirely new paradigms for what due professional care actually looks like in practice.
It really is a leap.
Because the 4th edition seemed to assume a very linear, traditional waterfall-style audit process. You plan for a month, you test for 3 months, you write a report for a month, but software development doesn't work like that anymore.
It absolutely doesn't, and that was a growing friction point in the industry. The 5th edition explicitly addresses agile methodologies and continuous delivery.
Which is how everything is built now.
Think about it. Development teams push new code into production daily, sometimes hourly. If an auditor takes 6 months to complete a traditional audit, by the time they issue their report, the system they audited has undergone 100 different iterations.
The report is historical fiction by the time it's published.
Exactly.
So how does an auditor exercise due care when the target is moving at the speed of light?
The 5th edition introduces comprehensive guidelines for continuous auditing and agile approaches. It mandates that auditors must adapt to iterative planning and shortened cycles.
So they have to speed up.
Due professional care now means you have to maintain your high standards of audit quality, ensure you are gathering sufficient evidence, and establish rigorous quality reviews, all within a fast-paced, sprint-based cycle.
That's a massive operational shift.
You might be auditing a specific microservice this week and a different feature next week. You are embedding continuous monitoring tools to audit at the speed of development rather than chasing the development team months after the fact.
And I also noticed the 5th edition adds highly specific guidelines for exercising due care regarding AI and third-party risk. We touched on this in the charter, but how does due care apply here?
For third-party risk, due care is no longer just reading the contract your company signed with the cloud provider.
That used to be the bare minimum.
Right. Due care now means you have to actively evaluate the resilience, the compliance posture, and the control environment of outsourced providers and digital platforms. You have to assess the vendor-provided assurance.
What does that mean in plain English, vendor-provided assurance?
It means you can't just take Amazon or Microsoft's word that their cloud is secure. They will provide you with their own audit reports, like a SOC2 report conducted by an independent firm.
Right, the report on their controls.
Due professional care means the IT auditor must possess the skill to read that massive, complex SOC2 report, understand the specific scope of what was tested, identify any control failures the vendor had, and calculate the residual risk to their own enterprise.
That's a lot of reading between the lines.
And regarding AI, due professional care explicitly requires validating model reliability, confirming data quality, and ensuring the AI's governance aligns with ISACA's published AI audit resources.
Okay, stop right there. You just listed an incredibly demanding set of technical requirements.
It is demanding.
The auditor needs to understand agile sprint cycles, evaluate massive cloud provider SOC2 reports, validate mathematical AI models, and check data quality. This brings up a glaring question. How on earth does one person know how to do all of that?
It's a tall order.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 6, General Standard 1006 on proficiency.
It is the natural next question. The fundamental baseline across all editions is straightforward. You have to know what you are doing.
Obviously.
You must maintain professional competence through continuous education, training, and practical experience. You cannot audit something you don't understand.
But the resume of an IT auditor just got a massive, intimidating upgrade in the 5th edition.
It certainly did.
If I look back at the 4th edition era, having a strong grasp of basic IT infrastructure, knowing how Active Directory works, understanding network firewalls, and knowing how to conduct a traditional risk assessment was generally enough to be considered a highly proficient auditor.
That was a baseline. The 5th edition completely redefines that baseline. It now explicitly mandates analytical and data literacy.
So no more just looking at spreadsheets.
An auditor can no longer rely on looking at a printed spreadsheet of 50 sample transactions. They must now be able to interpret and validate vast data sets using data-driven techniques. They need to know how to write scripts, leverage automation platforms, and apply continuous auditing methodologies.
But it goes much, much further than just data analytics.
It does. The 5th edition explicitly requires documented knowledge of emerging technologies. And the text doesn't just say emerging tech broadly. It provides specific, daunting examples: artificial intelligence and quantum computing.
Let's talk about quantum computing for a second. The fact that quantum computing is now a documented, required proficiency in an IT audit framework shows just how fast the future is rushing toward us.
It really does.
For a lot of people, quantum computing still sounds like science fiction. Why does an IT auditor need to be proficient in it today?
Because the threat it poses to digital trust is existential. Quantum computers operate on principles of quantum mechanics, allowing them to process certain types of complex calculations exponentially faster than classical computers.
Okay.
The major risk, and the reason auditors must care, is that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could easily break the cryptographic algorithms that currently secure nearly all digital communications and data on Earth. Things like RSA encryption.
So if I send a secure transaction to my bank, A quantum computer could theoretically crack the encryption and read it instantly.
Exactly. This is known in the industry as Q-day the day. Quantum computers render current encryption obsolete.
Q-day? That sounds ominous.
Now, while Q-day might still be years away, bad actors are currently engaging in harvest now, decrypt later attacks.
What does that mean?
They are stealing massive amounts of heavily encrypted, highly sensitive data today, simply storing it and waiting for the day they get their hands on a quantum computer to unlock it all.
Wow, they're just hoarding the locked safes until they invent the master key.
That's a great analogy. Therefore, a proficient IT auditor in 2026 needs to understand this threat. They need to be auditing their organization's crypto agility. Are we inventorying all our cryptographic assets? Are we preparing to migrate to post-quantum cryptography standards?
If an auditor doesn't even know what quantum computing is, they cannot identify that massive looming risk.
Exactly.
That is terrifying and fascinating at the same time. Furthermore, the 5th edition highlights proficiency in digital trust and ethics. An auditor must now possess the competence to address uniquely modern, high-stakes societal risks.
Yes, the text specifically calls out the need to evaluate risks related to synthetic media.
We are talking about deep fakes here, right?
Yeah. Yes, deep fakes used for social engineering or financial fraud. Plus, evaluating the risks of organized misinformation campaigns that could destroy a brand's reputation overnight. And as we discussed, algorithmic bias.
I really want the listener to grasp the magnitude of this shift. If you are listening to this and you are building your career in this space, hear this clearly. The skills that got you hired and promoted in 2020 will absolutely not keep you employed in 2026.
It's adapt or perish.
You have to understand how a neural network might inadvertently discriminate against a protected class of people, and you have to know mathematically how to test for that bias.
You do?
You have to understand how a bad actor might use a highly convincing AI-generated voice clone of the CEO to bypass voice biometric security on a massive wire transfer. It is a completely different, highly sophisticated world.
It is an absolute paradigm shift in professional competence. And this shift is deeply tied to how we actually measure and interact with these new technologies, which brings us to Section 7, General Standard 1007.
Which is all about assertions. Okay, let's unpack assertions, because this is where the framework gets incredibly philosophical. For the listener who might not be a trained accountant or auditor and needs a quick refresher, the core concept across both editions is that assertions are essentially statements or claims about the subject matter that the auditor is testing.
Correct. The easiest way to think about it is that management is making a claim.
Management asserts our financial reporting system is secure and accurate.
Right. The auditor's job is not to build the system. The auditor's job is to systematically gather evidence to prove or disprove management's assertion.
Got it. And the 4th edition focused heavily on classic traditional assertions. Things like completeness, accuracy, validity, and restricted access.
Standard audit stuff.
Does the system record all transactions completely? Are the dollar amounts accurate? Are the transactions valid and authorized? Is access restricted only to authorized users? These are very human, very logical claims.
But the 5th edition leap asks a fundamental, almost sci-fi question. How do you audit a machine that makes its own decisions?
This raises an important question indeed.
The 5th edition introduces a whole new category called digital trust assertions. And the two most critical ones are transparency and ethics and fairness.
Let's break those down. What does an assertion of transparency actually look like when you are auditing an AI?
Transparency asks, is the AI explainable? Do the systems provide clear, understandable, and auditable information about their internal operations and decision-making logic?
Okay.
Management might assert, our AI loan approval system is transparent. The auditor then have to test that claim. If the system is a black box that just spits out a yes or no without any underlying rationale that a human can interpret, the assertion of transparency fails.
And ethics and fairness?
Ethics and fairness asks, is the technology designed, deployed, and used in a manner consistent with ethical principles and completely free of discriminatory bias? Management asserts the algorithm is fair. The auditor has to prove it mathematically.
But here is the most groundbreaking addition in the entire 5th edition text regarding assertions. The framework introduces a concept called non-human assertions.
This is wild.
Can you explain what that means? Because it sounds like we are putting a robot on the witness stand.
That is essentially what it is, and it is one of the most futuristic, challenging elements of the 5th edition. Traditionally, management human beings make assertions. A human signs a piece of paper saying the system works.
Right.
But in modern, hyper-automated environments, We now have complex systems generating their own assertions automatically, without any human intervention.
Give me an example of a non-human assertion.
Imagine a highly advanced cybersecurity AI that monitors a global network. It detects an anomaly, investigates it, neutralizes the threat, and then generates an automated, cryptographically signed log entry stating exactly what it did and why.
Okay.
That log entry is a technology-generated non-human assertion. The machine is claiming, I found a threat, I stopped it, and here's the proof.
So the machine is speaking for itself.
The fifth edition states that auditors now have to verify the provenance, integrity, and logic of evidence generated entirely by these opaque proprietary AI systems.
So the machine is asserting that it did the right thing, and the auditor has to figure out if the machine is telling the truth, if it's malfunctioning, or if it is hallucinating.
Exactly. The auditor must evaluate whether the underlying system has been designed to produce assertions that are truly reliable, tamper-resistant, and logically sound.
You have to confirm the source, the chain of custody, and the absolute integrity of that technology-generated evidence.
What if a hacker compromised the AI and forced it to write a fake log entry to cover their tracks? The auditor has to prove that didn't happen.
That is an incredibly heavy burden. And what if the system is just too complex? What if it's a deep neural network with billions of parameters, and it is truly a black box where you simply cannot verify exactly how the AI came to its conclusion?
The framework anticipates that. The standard explicitly tells the auditor that if non-human assertions cannot be fully verified due to the opacity of the AI, they cannot just shrug and say, looks okay.
What do?
They must explicitly document and disclose that the assertions could not be validated, and they must formally communicate the residual risk of relying on that unverified machine logic to the governing bodies and the board of directors.
That is just incredible. The auditor is essentially interrogating the machine's own internal logic. And to do that effectively, you need solid benchmarks to measure against.
Which brings us to Section 8, General Standard 1008, Criteria.
Right. You can't interrogate a machine based on a gut feeling.
The core similarity here is that an auditor cannot just walk into a server room, look around, and say, I think this looks bad. You need clear, established, documented benchmarks known as criteria to measure the subject matter against. Both editions unequivocally agree that criteria must be suitable and acceptable for the engagement.
If I recall, the 4th edition listed standard traditional attributes for what makes criteria suitable. It had to possess objectivity, completeness, relevance, reliability, measurability, and understandability.
Your classic bedrock audit metrics.
But the 5th edition LEAP adds 2 crucial new attributes specifically designed for the digital trust era.
Those 2 new mandatory attributes are transparency and explainability.
How do they differ from the assertions we just talked about?
Good question. The assertion is the claim being made. The criteria is the benchmark used to test that claim.
Oh, okay.
Transparency means the criteria must be structured in a way that shows exactly how outputs are generated and allows practitioners to trace the final results all the way back to their absolute source data.
And explainability.
Explainability ensures that the process behind the outputs can actually be understood by a human being, particularly in highly automated or AI-driven environments.
The source text provides a fantastic illustrative example of this regarding healthcare. Can we walk through that? Because it makes these abstract words very real.
Let's do it. Imagine a hospital network that deploys a sophisticated medical AI model. This AI reviews patient scans, medical histories, and real-time vitals, and then recommends a specific medical diagnosis or treatment plan.
High-stakes stuff.
Now, the IT auditor is called in to audit this system. Under the old rules, the auditor might just check if the software is running on a secure server, if only doctors have access to it, and if the data is backed up.
But under the 5th edition, with the new criteria of explainability, that is not nearly enough.
Not even close. The criteria of explainability demands that the auditor must be able to validate the specific logical steps the AI took.
So they have to look under the hood.
If the AI model spits out a recommendation saying, diagnose this patient with condition X and prescribe medication Y, the system must explain why.
Show its work.
The auditor must be able to see the specific patient data points, the exact weighting of variables, and the logical pathway that led the AI to that specific reasoning. They have to validate that the AI's reasoning aligns with established clinical criteria, not just random correlations.
So if the AI says, I recommend surgery, and the doctor asks why, and the AI system essentially shrugs and says, because my neural network parameter 4502 triggered, but I can't explain what that parameter means in English,
then the auditor has to write that up as a critical failure.
Wow.
If the AI cannot explain itself in terms a human can validate against established criteria, it fails the standard, period.
That is a massive takeaway. If you are a practitioner prepping for a meeting right now, or a developer building an AI tool for enterprise use, write this down. Because the AI said so is no longer an acceptable audit finding or defense.
Never again.
The AI has to show its work step by step, just like a middle school math student taking a test. If it only gives the final answer, it fails.
That is exactly what it means. And ensuring the AI shows its work and that the auditor has the time and resources to check that work requires meticulous dynamic planning.
Which leads us to Section 9 of our syllabus, covering the performance standards 1201 through 1203. These standards deal with planning and scheduling.
We are crossing a major threshold here. We are moving from the general standards, which are the theory and philosophy of the rules, to the performance standards. This is moving from the classroom to the battlefield.
This is the actual execution of the job. And the baseline similarity is that everything an auditor does must be risk-based and formally scheduled. You don't just audit things randomly. You don't audit the criteria menu. You audit based on where the danger is.
But how we define, measure, and react to that danger has leaked forward dramatically in the 5th edition. Let's look closely at Standard 1201, Risk Assessment.
Okay.
In the past, under older frameworks, risk assessment could sometimes be a deeply subjective exercise. You would have a group of practitioners sitting in a conference room looking at a spreadsheet and deciding if a particular system's risk was high, medium, or low based on their gut feeling or very basic historical anecdotes.
The classic green, yellow, red heat map that looks pretty on a PowerPoint but doesn't actually mean anything mathematically.
Exactly. The 5th edition explicitly mandates a data-driven approach to risk assessment. It requires using both quantitative and qualitative factors. You can no longer just guess.
So what are they looking at?
You must ingest actual incident history data, real-time system metrics, threat intelligence feeds, and vulnerability scan outputs to prioritize your audit resources. You use data to find the danger.
And what about Standard 1202 audit scheduling? We touched on the Agile concept earlier, but how does the 5th edition fundamentally change the calendar?
It introduces Agile auditing directly into the formal scheduling framework. Traditionally, the chief audit executive built a massive, monolithic annual audit plan in November. They got it approved by the board in December, and the team strictly executed that rigid plan for the next 12 months.
But the 5th edition recognizes that in the digital trust era, risk changes weekly.
Yes. A new zero-day vulnerability drops, or a new AI tool is rapidly deployed by the marketing department. You cannot wait until next November to put it on the schedule.
So the schedule becomes fluid.
Yes. The standard moves from rigid annual plans to sprint-based iterative cycles. This provides the board with visibility into plan coverage, while preserving the mandatory flexibility to pivot immediately and address an emerging threat without waiting for next year's planning cycle.
You might plan out the next 3 months in detail, but leave the rest of the year open to adapt.
Exactly.
And what about Standard 1203, engagement planning? Once you decide to audit something, how do you plan the specific attack?
Standard 1203 now explicitly incorporates ISACA's AI audit guidance directly into the mandatory planning phase. When you're scoping an engagement that involves AI or AI-enabled systems, you cannot just use a generic IT template.
You need specialized tools.
You must reference current specialized AI audit guidance to determine the specific control objectives, the required skill sets, and the testing approaches before you even begin the fieldwork.
Which perfectly sets up Section 10, Performance Standards 1204 through 1207. This is the execution and evidence phase. This is the boots on the ground phase, gathering the data, supervising the team, bringing in the big guns when you need help, and crucially watching out for fraud.
The core similarity across both editions is the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of gathering sufficient, reliable, and appropriate evidence to support your conclusions.
We need proof.
You must properly supervise your audit team, know when to rely on outside experts, and maintain a state of high alert for irregularities and illegal acts.
I want to unpack the 5th edition leap for Standard 1205, evidence, because this changes the daily life of an auditor. Gathering evidence used to mean asking management to export a spreadsheet of users, picking 30 names at random and checking if they had the right permissions.
Right.
Or taking a literal screenshot of a server configuration screen to prove a firewall was turned on.
That manual sampling is essentially dead in the modern framework. The 5th edition updates evidence gathering to explicitly include and require the use of technology-enabled tools. The text specifically calls out advanced tools like process mining solutions, vulnerability scanners, and continuous monitoring applications.
For the listener who hasn't used it, explain what a process mining solution actually is, because it is incredibly powerful.
Process mining is essentially hooking an analytical engine directly into an enterprise system, like an SAP or Oracle database. Instead of manually sampling 30 transactions out of a million to see if the procurement process was followed, the process mining tool ingests all 1 million transactions.
All of them?
Yes. It maps every single digital footprint and visually reconstructs the actual process as it occurred in reality, not as it was designed on paper.
Wow.
It allows the auditor to evaluate 100% of the population and instantly identify the 3 specific transactions where a user bypassed the mandatory secondary approval. You find the exact anomalies automatically.
It's like having an X-ray of the entire company's operations. But what if the auditor is using these advanced tools and they encounter an architecture they just don't understand? Say, a highly complex, multi-cloud Kubernetes deployment or a proprietary machine learning model. Standard 1206 covers using the work of other experts. How does that change?
The 5th edition updates the very definition of an expert to specifically align with modern, highly specialized architecture. It explicitly includes cloud architects, advanced cybersecurity penetration testers, and AI specialists.
Because you can't be an expert in everything.
The framework acknowledges that an IT auditor is a generalist of risk. They are not expected to be a world-class quantum cryptographer or a machine learning engineer.
But they are expected to know how to manage one.
Exactly. They're expected to know when they're out of their depth, when to bring the expert in, how to rigorously assess the adequacy and independence of that expert's work, and how to seamlessly incorporate that expert's highly technical findings into the final cohesive audit conclusion.
Okay, here is where we get to the really cinematic part of the job. Standard 1207. Irregularities and illegal acts. This is the fraud section.
The dark side.
So, what does this all mean for catching the bad guys in 2026?
Fraud isn't just an accountant skimming cash off the top anymore, or an insider altering a ledger entry to hide a bad quarter. The 5th edition dramatically updates the red flags and the definitions of illegal acts to include modern, existential digital threats.
What kind of threats?
It explicitly calls out ransomware as a primary indicator of irregularities, not just as an external attack, but investigating if internal controls were willfully bypassed to allow the attack. But even more fascinating and chilling, it includes deliberate algorithmic bias and the manipulation of synthetic media.
Stop right there. Deliberate algorithmic bias. Let's paint a picture of what that actually means. That means an auditor is actively looking for situations where a rogue developer or a bad actor within the company intentionally and maliciously tweaks a complex machine learning model to favor a specific outcome.
Precisely. Imagine a developer at a major bank who holds deep ideological prejudices. They subtly tweak the bank's mortgage approval algorithm to systematically deny or increase interest rates for loans to a specific demographic or zip code.
Horrifying.
Or imagine an insider at a high-frequency trading firm who alters a trading algorithm to shave fractions of a cent off millions of micro-trades, diverting that money to a hidden account. It is highly sophisticated, mathematically camouflaged fraud.
The auditor has to find that needle in the mathematical haystack.
And the manipulation of synthetic media deepfakes. An auditor now has to evaluate if controls are in place to prevent a fraudster from using AI-generated voice or video to bypass biometric authentication.
Like pretending to be the CEO on a call.
Exactly. Or preventing a scenario where a criminal uses a deepfake video of the CEO on a live Zoom call to instruct the finance team to authorize a massive fraudulent wire transfer.
That exact scenario has already happened in the real world, costing companies tens of millions of dollars.
The 5th edition requires the auditor to understand these highly sophisticated attack vectors and evaluate the specific technical and human controls designed to prevent them.
The job of an IT auditor has basically evolved into being a digital cyber detective. It's incredible. Which brings us to our final section on the syllabus, Section 11, Reporting Standards 1401 and 1402.
And final step.
You've planned the audit, you've used process mining to gather the evidence, you've investigated the AI for bias. Now you have to tell management what you found.
The culmination of all the work. The core similarity here is the fundamental mechanic of reporting. You must issue a formal, written, evidence-based report that clearly communicates the results of the engagement.
And you can't just walk away.
No. Crucially, you must conduct follow-up activities. You don't just drop the report on the CEO's desk and leave. You have to verify that management actually fixes the problems you found within the agreed-upon timeframe.
But the fifth edition makes a major, incredibly important leap in how you handle a management team that is being stubborn. What happens when management just doesn't want to fix the problem?
This is a critical update in Standard 1402 regarding the formal escalation of risk. Sometimes management looks at a finding. Let's say the auditor proves that an expensive, newly deployed AI system has an unresolved systemic bias issue.
Okay.
Management looks at the cost of taking the system offline and redesigning it, and they decide it's just too costly and disruptive. They formally decide to just accept the risk and leave the bias system running.
Under older frameworks, the auditor might just document that management accepted the risk, file the work paper, and move on.
But the fifth edition places a much heavier, stricter emphasis on escalation. If the auditor determines that management has accepted a risk that is clearly beyond the enterprise's established risk appetite or violates ethical or regulatory boundaries, the standard now strictly guides the practitioner on how to escalate that acceptance over the heads of senior management.
So they go straight to the top.
The auditor is compelled to take the issue directly to the highest governing body, usually the board of directors or the enterprise risk committee. You cannot just write it in a report, file it away, and wash your hands of it.
You have to force the issue.
You must ensure the ultimate governing authority is explicitly, formally aware that a massive, potentially catastrophic risk is being ignored by executive management.
That is a powerful mandate. It gives the auditor some serious teeth and forces accountability. Now, before we wrap up, there is also a fascinating structural difference you noted in your notes regarding the reporting and the overall framework design related to COBIT. Can you explain that?
Yes, if we look at the structural design of the actual documents, the fourth edition constantly, almost rigidly, linked every single standard back to specific COBIT 2019 management objectives.
Right. COBIT is ISACA's overarching IT governance framework.
In the fourth edition, you would read a standard, and it would immediately hard-code a map to a COBIT objective, like EDM-01, which is the objective for setting the governance framework, or MEA-04 for managed assurance. It was heavily intertwined.
And the fifth edition?
The fifth edition completely drops this rigid mapping.
Why drop it? COBIT is still an incredibly relevant, globally recognized framework, isn't it?
It is entirely relevant. But dropping the hard-coded mapping reflects a broader, much more adaptable approach to the global landscape of digital trust frameworks.
How so?
The fifth edition recognizes that while COBIT is foundational, practitioners in 2026 are not operating in a vacuum. They are juggling the NIST cybersecurity framework, the European Union's GDPR, the Digital Operational Resilience Act in Europe, ISO standards, and a patchwork of emerging global AI regulations.
It's a crowded space.
Exactly.
Oh.
By decoupling the rigid COBIT mappings, the IT 5th edition positions itself as the universal, overarching standard for the actual conduct of an IT audit, regardless of which specific management framework or regulatory matrix the enterprise happens to be utilizing.
It makes ITF universally applicable.
Exact.
That makes perfect sense. It frees the standard to be a global toolkit rather than just a companion piece to one specific framework. Well, we have covered an absolutely massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
Let's take a breath and summarize this journey for the listener. We have walked chronologically through the syllabus. We have watched the evolution from the 4th edition's strong focus on traditional IT controls, historical compliance, and standard, somewhat subjective risk assessment into the 5th edition's brave new world.
The digital trust era.
We are now firmly living in the era of digital trust, where auditors are checking complex AI explainability, running highly fluid, agile auditing sprints, learning the physics of quantum computing, using process mining engines, and hunting down deliberate algorithmic bias and deepfake fraud.
It is a remarkable evolution of a profession. And for you listening, whether you are prepping for a crucial board meeting, studying the source materials for a certification exam, or just trying to catch up on how the technology field is fundamentally changing, the key takeaway is a fundamental shift in purpose.
The why has changed.
The why of IT auditing has shifted. It has moved away from mere historical compliance, simply checking boxes to prove a rule wasn't broken yesterday, to actively ensuring that the technology driving our future is ethical, transparent, and resilient.
The auditor is no longer just a historian. They are an active guardian of digital reality.
It is entirely about building and maintaining trust in a digital world that can sometimes feel like a dark, impenetrable black box. We are relying on these professionals to keep the machines honest.
Exactly. And to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. The fifth edition explicitly requires human auditors to verify the explainability of AI models and to rigorously audit non-human assertions.
Right.
It assumes a human can ultimately understand the machine. But as neural networks become infinitely more complex, containing hundreds of billions or even trillions of parameters, human comprehension of exactly how they make decisions will eventually hit a hard biological limit.
Our brains simply cannot process that level of mathematical complexity.
So will we soon reach a point where we have to build highly specialized, incredibly powerful AI systems strictly for the purpose of auditing other AIs? And if we cross that threshold, where machines are the only things capable of auditing machines, who audits the AI auditor? Oh, that is a fantastic, slightly terrifying question to leave off on. Who audits the auditor when the auditor is an algorithmic black box itself? I love it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the evolution of the ITF standards and the future of digital trust. Keep asking those big questions, keep exploring the frameworks, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.